Welcome to the Women Inspire Aspire podcast. In this episode, I talked to Ramaa Ramesh about Carnatic teaching. Hi Rama, thank you for accepting my invite to participate in this podcast. How are you doing today?
Hi, Venkat. Thank you so much for having me over. I'm doing really well, thank you. How are you?
I am good, thank you. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure, yeah. So I'm a Carnatic music teacher. I'm based in Yorkshire in England. I have been doing this for about 4 years now, teaching music. So I teach beginners, I teach vocal music, so to sing. And I teach beginners of all ages, you could say. So, young children all the way through to adults who probably, either started learning when they were young and had to stop learning, or who always maybe had that interest, but either didn't get a teacher, somewhere close by or whatever it is, and didn't get to actually pursue their passion to learn music. And there is quite a few people like that. So all age groups come to me. Children through to adults, through to, empty nest parents who now have extra time on their hands. So I teach the beginning, so the early verses and the Geetams and Alankarams and things, all the way through to a few initial Varnams and Kirtanas or Kritis, which are more complex songs. And then at the appropriate stage, would hand them over to a more advanced teacher. So I sort of, the musical version of early learner teacher or a kindergarten teacher, maybe you can call me that. So that's what I do for a living. Other than that, I'm also a storyteller. So I work mostly with children, kind of telling stories from India, India's history, our epics and scriptures. And other than that, I also write. So I'm a music writer. I usually profile Carnatic musicians and artists and write about them sometimes on my own website and sometimes for a magazine, for which I may work on a freelance basis.
Wonderful to hear about your work. You are contributing great work to Carnatic music. How did you get into Carnatic?
So I got into this because as a young child, like so many others, perhaps yourself and so many that, I also learned music. I was very interested. And I learned for about 15 to 16 years from a few different teachers. And at a certain age, usually what happens, especially if you're from a middle class family in India, is you have to generally make a choice between pursuing something like, an art form, whether that's music or dance or whatever, and then taking the road more traveled, which is some form of academic pursuit. So I also, like so many, did that. I had done a little bit of performing, maybe for like 6-7 years, but properly maybe 3-4 years, I would say. I had started to perform, concerts and things. And you could say that there was this maybe a decision point where I could have committed more to it or gone another direction. And so what I did at that time was I went and did a BCom, and then I did sort of a PGDM in business and management and that sort of thing in HR, and then kind of went into a different career, a different stream altogether. Did a decade of work in HR. About 10 years in, you again, as with everything else in work, also you reach a point where you go, do I want to do this? How much more of this, or is there anything else? And the pandemic gave, I think, a lot of us that decision point to try and take a leap of faith into something. So that was my chance to come back to music, which I always felt was a little bit of an unfinished journey for me. Best way to contribute, having done HR and training and development specifically for a living, I felt like training, teaching was a sort of natural extension of that. And that's how I got back, I should say, rather than got to music, got back to it this way. Spiritual home, my roots, everything is back in India. And maybe this line of work is also a way for me to not miss India so much, It feels like being back home in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real connection with the homeland. You are trying to spread the joy of Carnatic music to other parts of the world, which is fantastic.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, that's actually one of the reasons I started doing this particular aspect of it, which is, teaching beginners, and as you very kindly said, up to maybe you could say early to middle or high school level of music. And the reason I started doing that is when I spent time here, I realized so many diaspora, right? So many people from India, of Indian origin, whose children are growing up, people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, whose children are here. And they have quite naturally a very limited connection back to the motherland. It's, a trip once a year, they might make a trip back to India with the children, the calls with grandparents, that sort of thing. But I think the parents certainly feel like they want to maybe have these children be more in touch with their cultural roots. and to appreciate the part of them that will always be, a part of them will always be Indian, even if they grow up as, I don't know, British citizens or American citizens or Irish citizens or whatever it is. And this was, I felt, a way for me, whether it's the teaching of music or the storytelling, right? Both are ways to maybe plant a little seed here and there in the children. And the aim for me, at least with the music, is that whether or not they grow up and become performers or whatever, they will at the very least be an engaged, loving and appreciative audience of a classical art form. And nowadays there are so many ways to engage with it, right? You can perform, you can compose, you can be a patron, if you have the means and the resources, write lyrics. There's so many ways to be engaged. Be a musical critic or a writer. So if everybody that I teach has at least an appreciation for it later on in life, especially the children, I think my job here will be done. So it's, thank you for mentioning that, because it kind of reminded me that that's one of the main reasons I got into it also, is to try and keep that cultural spark alive in the next generation around me.
Talking about the cultural spark, there should be a reason why this classical art form is being encouraged and being taught in India and being spread worldwide. Have you personally experienced any benefits of singing Carnatic or teaching Carnatic? Has it brought you any kind of well-being aspects in you?
Oh, yes. It's a great question. Absolutely. I mean, the answer is 100% yes. As a child, I guess, growing up and learning it, one of the things it gave me was a sense of identity. You belong to an art form that has, a beginning lost in time and which is still relevant. And even the varices which we learn, so many of them, or the structure of the initial Gita or Gitams and all that, goes back hundreds of years and has been more or less preserved, we hope, with reasonable fidelity and passed on. So as a child, maybe without understanding all that nuance, certainly as a somewhat, I should say, lonely child, it was a home for me and a place to belong and something at which I was able to do well. And I think so, though I didn't know the words mental health, maybe back then, looking back, this was a great sense of home and family and belonging for me with music and with, other students who learned or performed. And so it forms its own kind of kinship and family. And then growing up and moving through different countries, two different cultures, stages of life, being away from home, the one common thread, I think, through all of that, other than family, for me, being in touch with family, was music. It's a form of family that you carry with you. A part of your home that you carry with you. That's how I always felt about it. And I guess I was always kind of tuned into it. And now, whether it is singing for my own pleasure or whether it is teaching, what I definitely feel is it is one area where, free from maybe politics or personalities, it's a place just to lose yourself and to be there. And that definitely, I feel, when I speak very selfishly in my response right now to you, as a, from my perspective as a teacher or somebody who enjoys singing, whether I sit in front of, in pursuit of my faith, whether I sit in front of God to sing or whether it is that I just sing for my own pleasure or whether I teach, sometimes I think to myself, I don't know where I would be without this music. It anchors me. It has been a source of strength and solace and an outlet for creativity and so much more than that. And as for students, I don't know if your question extended to that, but let me maybe also touch on that. The students who learn from me, especially the grown-ups, the adults, will often say, if they are people with family and children or, in-laws or different forms of, having to care for various people, this is the 1 30-minute part of their day that they don't have to think about anybody or anything. They can just be here with themselves and by themselves and the music. That I hear a lot, and I won't ask, this comes to me unsolicited from people. They feel that it's something, it means so much that they share it of their own accord with me. And as well, people in professional walks of life who are learning will say, they won't know where the time goes. And when I say, it's time, we're at time to wrap up the lesson, a lot of them will often be surprised that the clock is showing whatever time it's showing, because it's such a chance to experience that flow state and just be in the moment for people, as well as for some people a chance to connect with their faith. And it's a way to express faith and explore faith also. So yeah, I would say without a doubt, Yes.
Great, great.
So I have a website on which I've done maybe 7 or 8 interviews where I profiled different musicians of today. I would say maybe more the younger generation. And I'm always curious when I see musicians, especially of all ages and experience, but especially the younger generation. I'm always curious to know what their stories are. I suppose sort of like you're curious to know what mine or so many other stories are. So I suppose in that sense, we do something quite similar. So I want to know what their journey into music is, and what their relationship with their guru or their teacher is, what moments of their journey are most memorable for them. So this is how it started. So I was writing on my website, and it's on a bit of a pause right now, I would say, on the website, but hoping to get back to it in the next 8 to 12 months. And along the way, someone from Shruti magazine, and that is a fine arts magazine in India that you may know about. They cover all forms of classical arts, I think, but specifically in terms of music, I was approached to profile musicians. So I've written a couple of interviews, and a third that is, I think, slated for publication shortly. So that is the sort of work. I would describe it best as saying I'm always a curious learner, and I'm always interested in what the perspective and lives of musicians and what their engagement with their art form is like. And this just gives me an outlet to explore that.
When you talked to these different musicians, especially the young musicians, is there a common theme that you found? Is there any learning that you came across when you interviewed these people?
So much. Some of it varies from person to person because their experiences, even within the same field, even learning from the same teacher, two artists or two students of the art form can have very distinct experiences. And that itself was an interesting learning because we tend to club maybe them together as a younger generation or whatever. But, each person's stories are deeply unique and each person's journey is very, very different. Some come from musical backgrounds, some don't. And so it's all quite different in that sense. But if I were to maybe look at what has come up in common is that it takes a tremendous amount of effort to make it through to where we see them right now. And I suppose whichever era you pursue music in, each era will come with its own challenges. So without saying it's more or less challenging today, because I don't know, what is certainly the case is that we live in a world of distraction now, perhaps like never before, with access to media and social media and TV shows and instant fame, and it's not an era that is conducive naturally to deep work, to investment of time and energy and discipline in an undistracted way. So when you see people who've made it, to the top, or people who are performing actively today and have worked hard, in addition to circumstance and luck and all of that, it's certainly at the core what is common to all of them is a deep-rooted belief and passion in that art form and a tremendous amount of work and discipline that goes into getting them to that stage. And every single person I've spoken with or interviewed has shown evidence of really deep thinking about it. They profoundly thought about their art and what it means to them and how they want to express it. There is not one person who operates anywhere near the shallow level in terms of their art form. There's a lot of thinking that goes into it, a lot of work, and every single time I come away deeply impressed by how they think, what experiences they've had. Some of them have faced real difficulty as well to get here, in various forms and shapes, and how they've persevered and continue to invest back into that art form. So that maybe would be the common takeaway from all of them.
Absolutely, absolutely. So discipline, hard work, and passion, they are all so important. Tell us about your storytelling. What kind of stories do you tell?
I tell all sorts of stories from India's epics in history, right? So I pick stories from the Ramayana. So, everything, all the kandas in different parts at which interesting events occurred. Stories from the Mahabharata, stories from the Srimad Bhagavatam. So a lot of it comes from the epics, and the idea is to narrate it in a way that is interesting and relevant and engaging for the next generation to get, to get them interested and get them hooked onto it, because we have a wealth of storytelling, and that's kind of how it started. And then it starts to diversify outside of the epics, more recent stories of Bhagavata, stories from the Bhakti movement, stories of musical composers, stories of Arvars and Nayanmars. So there is so much to tell. There is only not enough time, to be honest. So those are all the kinds of stories that I tell the children.
Fantastic. And it is Amazing that you have learned all these stories. Wonderful. So I am pretty sure that you are fully occupied with the Carnatic music, the storytelling, and family and stuff like that. But apart from all those things, do you have any other hobbies or interests that you pursue?
Yeah, quite a few. Like yourself, I really enjoy reading because I think you said in the middle you like Oscar Wilde and you like a few other British authors, right? So I read a lot. True, I've always been since I was a child the bookworm. That hasn't changed at all. So I read. I really like P.G. Wodehouse. I read a lot of his work. For about 2.5 decades now. So he's a comfort author that I go back to all the time. I like a good murder mystery. I like Agatha Christie. I enjoy Alistair MacLean, so a little bit of adventure and actions, that sort of thing. So I read quite a bit. And now, as I get older, more I would say non-fiction. So about the human body or the brain or the mind, how it works, things like about ultra processed food or whatever is interesting and new that I can get my hands on. I like to read. I really like science fiction, which is more of in the last decade that I've been introduced to that. So Dune, for example, which is in the news now with the movies and that sort of thing. So I like reading all of that. So I read. I also I really like letter writing. So a little old school that way, postcards and letters. So almost every week, if not twice a week, I'm out to the post box, posting something, receiving something through my door, in letterbox. So really enjoy the world of writing by hand and sending something to someone. So I do that quite a bit. Other than that, just enjoy quiet time in nature, a long walk, that sort of thing.
Thank you so much for spending time with us in this podcast. I wish you all the best and good luck for all your aspirations, Rama.
Thank you so much for having me, Venkat. It was such a pleasure to talk to you, and thanks for all your thoughtful questions. Even if I've been asked or thought about them with time, the answers change. So it was a chance to take stock and ask myself some of these questions and see what comes out. So I really appreciate that. All the very best for your second book with your book and your work, and good luck with all your future creations and publications and podcasts.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye bye.
That was a great podcast with Ramaa Ramesh. Please subscribe to this channel and follow it for more awesome podcasts. Opinions expressed by the guests in this podcast are their own. The host or the sponsors of the podcast do not condone the opinions expressed by the guests or the actions arising out of those opinions. Any decisions or actions that the listeners might take as a result of listening to this podcast must be based on their own judgment and will be at their own risk. The podcast host or their sponsors will not be held responsible for the consequences of any actions and or decisions taken as a result of any content in this podcast.